Hello again, this is John Burroughs, and I'm going to continue with my autobiography, 7 Years to Life. This is chapter 42, and it's called Careless Courage. I have been married to Georgia for about 2 months. Excuse me. My day off at 25th Avenue Shell had been changed to Saturday, and I was now working a 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift. The changes were due to another attendant quitting his job that made me next in line for the Saturday off and one of the day shifts. This freed up Friday nights for George and I to get together with good friends and get high on acid. My job, with its time commitments, days off, and associated responsibilities, considerably reduced the amount of times that I could get high, at least in a carefree manner. Most people had their favorite places to go or activities to participate in when tripping. Favorite places that were most often suggested were the airport, the beach, the woods, a concert, or driving around San Francisco listening to music. Driving around San Francisco in the 60s on acid was like watching a different freak show each night. As much as people enjoyed those nights, it was not often done because in most cases, people that were tripping had little or no confidence in their driving ability. For me, it was the exact opposite. I loved to drive on acid because I marveled at a man's ability to create machines that made the world a little smaller. As I said before, when you add a sound system that made your favorite band sound like they were performing in the car just for you, and add the sights of San Francisco on a Friday night, you were in hippie heaven. San Francisco often reminded me of an urban Disneyland. The Haight District, along with Golden Gate Park, was Fantasyland. The San Francisco Bay, straddled by two of the world's most amazing bridges, the Golden Gate Bridge and the Oakland Bay Bridge, were huge jetliners flying above them as they landed or took off from the airport, was Tomorrowland. The ships, both passenger and freighter, waiting to depart from some foreign ports of call, docked at the piers along the waterfront on Embarcadero Street, was Adventureland. Finally, Hunters Point, the Fillmore District, and the Tenderloin, where unknown dangers lurked at every corner, was Frontierland. Driving around that city made you feel like you were watching a strange movie, and yet no movie ever made could compare to the excitement and wonder of the reality that you were witnessing. Again, it was one of those Friday nights, and with Saturday off, Georgia and I left San Francisco, picked up Richard P. and Ian G. in the CUDA. We were not actually living in San Francisco at the time, but we were caretaking a house for a friend of a friend's. I parked on the east side of the reservoir, which was beautifully surrounded by the woods, bifurcated by Highway 92 that led to Half Moon Bay and the coast. We had dropped LSD after the decision was made that we would go back to San Francisco, drive around, and let the city be our guide. To experience the beauty of nature, we drove to San Francisco via Highway 1, or the Coast Road, as it was called. The drive was breathtaking, had breathtaking views of the Pacific Ocean, while on the right side was the woods along the mountains that separated the valley from the coast. Highway 1 also contained the perilous Devil's Slide, where the design of the road brought cars dangerously close to the cliffs above and the ocean. Sometimes, if you were seated on the right side of the vehicle when heading from San Francisco, the road would disappear beneath you, and all that could be seen were the banged-up guardrails and the deep drop to the ocean. Devil's Slide was accurately named for all the landslides that occurred, especially in the rainy winter. I knew of many people, old and young, that refused to take this route, regardless of which direction they were headed. There were also many people that, if time permitted, would take this route because it reminded you that you were just an insignificant, minute blip on the radar screen of time. Eventually, we made it to the heart of the city, and as usual, the lights and sounds and the characters that inhabited the night never failed to make one feel that they had entered another dimension, a twilight zone, if you will. We all experience the various stages of an acid trip differently from one another, simply because people are wired differently from one another. There was the commonality of perception that something uniquely different was happening to you, but each of us had different thoughts and reactions to the changes that LSD initiated. For me, when peaking, I would always feel capable of looking into a person rather than at him or her, and with this came the feeling of invincibility. I never thought I could leap buildings in a single bound or perform amazing feats of strength, but there was not any situation that could possibly confront me that I could not handle successfully. I was fearless, and on this particular night I proved it, and the actions I took were instinctive rather than contemplated. Like any other urban Disneyland, inhabitants of one land sometimes ventured into other lands. In most cases, it was to get from point A to point B, while in other cases, it was just curiosity or predatory in purpose. I was on a one-way street towards Market Street, and I was stopped at a red light, when a couple of dangerous-looking guys pulled up right beside us. Richard P. and Ian G. were in the back seat, while I occupied the driver's seat with Georgia riding shotgun. A car, a lowered Chevy, complete with hydraulics, pulled up alongside of us. Its two inhabitants were both wannabe superflies. They both leaned over, peering into our car and seeing three long hippies and one beautiful girl in the car. The driver began saying some downright nasty and insulting shit to and about Georgia. He turned his attention to Richard, Ian, and I, and began his derogatory tirade directed to and about us. There were a few dynamics taking place. First of all, Richard and Ian were two of the most enjoyable people to trip with. However, when faced with danger and the potential for physical violence, they were complete, well, let's call them cowards, to say the least. Secondly, they knew the inevitable. They knew that I would not let this go, and they knew I was on acid that only added to my fearlessness, but it amplified their fear. They were correct. The light turned green, and I took off, and they paced us all the way to the next red light, making sexually suggestive comments to Georgia. At this red light, I exited the CUDA with Richard and Ian protesting in the back seat, inspired by the fact that I knew, probably because of the acid, that these two guys fully expected me to be intimidated. When they saw me walking around the CUDA, an obvious look of apprehension took over the cockiness that was previously on their faces. I honestly feel that they were not entirely sure of what they were seeing. I went to the driver's side, bent down, and stared, without blinking, directly into their eyes. I had never been angry on acid before, so I don't know how this made me look, but what I do know is that whatever came next, I was prepared to make these guys feel my wrath, and if it came to violence, I had already accepted the fact that it was too late to turn back and take a different direction, because if I did, these guys would not let up for the rest of the night. I also feared by turning the other cheek, figuratively speaking, would only lead to some kind of attack anyway. This is what I said to them. I know this is the era of equal rights, and I'm supposed to be intimidated by two insignificant pieces of shit like you. I extended my right arm into the car and asked, "Do you see me shaking at all?" I paused, waiting for an answer. When none came, I went on. The people that I know are generally interested in changing the racial barriers in this country, and the two of you are more dangerous to their cause because you are not worthy of respect. It is unfortunate that a very close minority friend of mine is not here, or we would have kicked your asses already, which, by the way, I intend to do. My two buddies in the back seat abhorred violence, and right now they were scared shitless. So, you have nothing to fear from them. I need you to understand that the girl you are insulting is my wife, and any man, white, black, yellow, or brown, would not tolerate that type of disrespect toward their wife or anyone they loved or cared about deeply. I am begging you to hang a right and turn into the nearest parking lot you see, and if you have the guts, I will take you on one at a time, because I need to hurt you badly. I now realize I had lost all control. However, the anger I had been dealing with all my life now had me completely in its possession, and I had abandoned all logic. Those guys looked at me, and one said to the other, "Just take off, brother. This guy is one crazy MFer." And in all honesty, they were correct. They burned rubber and took off. As time passed and the acid began to peak, I knew I could have been killed along with my wife and friends. All three of them were furious with me, but they could not hide the fact that those guys were put in their place. I do regret the actions I took that night, because I had no right endangering other people. As the adrenaline subsided, the high grew to an intensity that my own personal experience grew to a level that I had never felt before. I no longer recognized where I was, yet everything that had just transpired was crystal clear in my mind. I, for the first time on acid, began to panic, and I voiced my feelings to the others. I had to get to familiar surroundings that would ease my growing fear. I needed to get back to the house that Georgia and I were caretaking, but getting there was something I no longer knew how to do. Georgia could not help me because she was still in the grip of trauma and seemed incapable of speech other than to say that I always did the driving and she never bothered to pay attention to how we got anywhere, much less how we returned home. Richard and Ian had only been to the place once before, and tonight's journey did not begin so they could offer no assistance. I had to think of something. I knew we had just crossed Market Street a few blocks back, and I knew my desired destination was very close to the intersection of Market and Castro Streets. It was called Levant Street, a street so small that you would be hard-pressed to find it on a map. The solution came in the form of an SFPD car that had just passed me doing its rounds. It should have been simple to find my way back, but I could not for the life of me recognize any of my surroundings. I had a hunch that my street was included in the rounds that the police car would take, and I did the unbelievable. I was lost, on acid, and I decided to follow a police car in the hope that it would somehow lead me home. Once again, my fellow travelers were miffed at my decision, and I offered them the opportunity to get out, which they declined. I cannot accurately say how long I was following behind the police car, but I clearly remember Georgia saying, I recognize the street we were on. It was State Street, and within the next 50 yards, the police car turned left on Levant Street, leading to my address. Relief came over me like a warm ray of sunlight, and I could tell everybody else felt the same way. The police car drove on, and we all got out of my car laughing as we walked toward the front door. I had heard Ian say to me, "Wait a minute, you left your lights on." I went back to shut them off, and as I walked around the front of the car, I was amazed to find that my left front headlight was not working. I had followed an SFPD car around the city for a considerable amount of time with a burned-out headlight. This was in an era when many young people hated cops and called them pigs. I knew that the cop knew I was following him, yet he never stopped and confronted me about the situation. I remember before going inside, I looked down the street a while to see if he would come around the corner, but he never did. You try to figure it out, because I can't.